In the golden grasslands of the African savanna, where the sun beats down mercilessly and every day brings new battles for survival, an incredible story unfolded that would challenge everything we think we know about courage and family bonds in the animal kingdom. It was early morning when a herd of buffalo moved slowly across the plains, searching for fresh grazing areas and water sources that hadn't dried up completely under the relentless heat. Among them walked a young male buffalo, not quite fully grown, but no longer a small calf either, at that awkward stage between childhood and adulthood where bravery often exceeds wisdom. He stayed close to his mother, as he always had since the day he was born, keeping watch over her with a devotion that was unusual even among buffalo, who are known for their strong family structures. His mother was getting older now, her once powerful body showing signs of age with a slight limp in her back leg from an old injury that never quite healed properly. She moved slower than the rest of the herd and sometimes struggled to keep up when they needed to move quickly across the vast distances between waterholes. The young buffalo had noticed predators watching his mother more frequently. In recent weeks, their calculating eyes following her movements and noting her weakness like accountants tallying up numbers. Lions, hyenas, and even crocodiles at the river crossings seemed to single her out from the herd, recognizing her as a potential target that wouldn't be able to run or fight as effectively as the younger, stronger members. But what these predators didn't know was that her son had made an unspoken promise to himself that nothing would harm her as long as he drew breath. On this particular morning, the air felt different, somehow heavier with tension, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for something significant to happen. The herd had split into smaller groups, as they often did when grazing with some animals wandering further away, while others stayed closer together for safety. The young buffalo and his mother found themselves somewhat isolated from the main group, grazing near a cluster of acacia trees that provided sparse shade from the climbing sun. That's when the danger arrived silently and without warning from the tall grass that surrounded them like golden walls hiding death. A coalition of 3 male lions emerged from the grass, moving with the coordinated precision of experienced hunters who had worked together for years perfecting their deadly craft. Their golden manes were thick and dark, marking them as mature, dominant males in their prime who didn't need to hunt often, but when they did, they chose their targets carefully. They had been tracking this particular herd for days, watching and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike when an easy meal presented itself without too much risk or effort required. The old mother buffalo was exactly what they had been looking for, and now she stood separated from the main herd, with only her young son beside her. The lions spread out, forming a loose triangle that would cut off any escape routes and force their prey into making fatal mistakes driven by panic and desperation. Their yellow eyes were locked onto the limping female who represented hundreds of pounds of meat that would feed them for days with minimal risk compared to attacking healthy adults or the dangerous bulls with their massive horns. The young buffalo saw them first and immediately positioned himself between his mother and the approaching predators. His nostrils flared as he caught their scent on the breeze, and every muscle in his body tensed, preparing for the confrontation he knew was coming. He let out a deep warning bellow that echoed across the plains, alerting both his mother and any nearby herd members that danger was closing in fast. His mother turned and saw the lions, and her eyes widened with fear, not for herself, but for her son, who she knew would not abandon her even when wisdom dictated he should run. The lions paused for a moment, surprised by the young buffalo's aggressive stance and his refusal to flee like most young animals would when faced with apex predators. They had expected an easy hunt where the old female would be too slow to escape, and any younger animals would scatter in terror, leaving her defenseless. But this young male stood his ground, pawing at the earth with his front hooves and lowering his head to present his developing horns as weapons. The lead lion, a massive male with a scarred face and battle-tested confidence, made a low, rumbling sound that was half growl and half warning, telling the buffalo to move aside or face the consequences. The young buffalo didn't move an inch instead, taking a bold step forward that surprised even the experienced lions who weren't used to prey animals showing such defiance and courage. His eyes burned with determination as he positioned himself directly in front of his mother, creating a living shield between her and the three massive predators who could easily kill him with their powerful jaws and razor-sharp claws. He bellowed again, louder this time, hoping desperately that the sound would carry far enough to reach other herd members who might come to their aid before it was too late. His mother tried to push past him, wanting to face the lions herself, knowing that her life was already near its end, and seeing no reason why her son should die defending her when he had so many years ahead of him. She nudged him with her head, trying to force him aside, but he planted his hooves firmly in the dusty ground and refused to budge, even as she became more insistent. The bond between them was visible in every movement, in every desperate attempt she made to save him, and every stubborn refusal he gave to abandon her. The lions began to circle now, moving with practiced coordination, as they tested the young buffalo's defenses, looking for weaknesses and opportunities to separate him from his mother. One lion moved to the left, while another went right, and the lead male stayed in the center, creating multiple threats that would be impossible for the young buffalo to defend against simultaneously. They knew that eventually he would have to choose which direction to face, and that split-second decision would create an opening for one of the others to strike. The young buffalo spun back and forth, trying desperately to keep all three predators in his line of sight, while backing up to keep his body pressed against his mother's so they couldn't get behind him. Sweat dripped from his flanks, and his breathing became labored from the stress and adrenaline flooding his system, but he never wavered in his determination. The lions could see his youth and inexperience in the way he moved with too much energy and not enough calculated precision. But they could also see something else that gave them pause. They saw a willingness to die that made him unpredictable and therefore dangerous, because an animal with nothing to lose often fights with a ferocity that can injure or kill even the most skilled predators. The lions had scars from previous hunts, where desperate prey had landed lucky blows that resulted in broken bones, infected wounds, or worse. A buffalo's horn could easily disembowel a lion or crush their skull with one powerful thrust, and even a young male like this one had enough size and strength to cause serious damage if he connected with a well-placed strike. The lead lion decided to test the young buffalo's resolve by making a sudden feint forward, as if preparing to charge. The young buffalo immediately lowered his head and rushed forward several steps, meeting the challenge head-on with a courage that bordered on recklessness. The lion backed off clearly, not expecting such an aggressive response from what should have been terrified prey. The other two lions exchanged glances, seemingly communicating without words about whether this meal was worth the potential cost of injury. Behind him, the mother buffalo watched with a mixture of pride and heartbreak as her son fought to defend her life at the cost of his own. She had raised him, taught him how to find food, and water showed him which plants were safe to eat and which watering holes to avoid during crocodile season. She had protected him from predators when he was small, groomed him when he was covered in mud, and stood beside him during his first encounters with the dangers of the savannah. Now, he was repaying that debt in the most profound way possible by refusing to let her face death alone. The standoff continued, with neither side willing to back down as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, turning the air into a shimmering heat haze that distorted distances and made everything feel surreal. The young buffalo's legs trembled from exhaustion and nervous energy, but he maintained his defensive position, watching the lions with unwavering focus. His mother called out one more time, a low, mournful sound that seemed to say, "Thank you and goodbye. And I love you all at once," in the complex language that animals speak without words. Then one of the lions made its move, darting in from the left side with explosive speed that closed the distance in a heartbeat. The young buffalo pivoted faster than seemed possible for an animal his size and met the charge with his horns lowered, driving forward with all the power his young muscles could generate. The impact sent both animals stumbling as horn met flesh, and the lion let out a roar of pain and surprise, backing away quickly with fresh claw marks raked across the buffalo's shoulder where it had tried to grip and pull him down. Blood dripped from both animals, now staining the dusty ground and raising the stakes of this confrontation to a new level. The young buffalo was breathing heavily, his sides heaving from the exertion of the brief, violent exchange, but his eyes still blazed with determination. The injured lion limped slightly as it rejoined its coalition partners, and all three predators reassessed the situation with a new understanding that this would not be the easy meal they had anticipated when they first spotted the old female. The lead lion growled in frustration because hunger was gnawing at all of them, and they had already invested time and energy into this hunt that could have been spent pursuing other opportunities. But pride and stubbornness are traits that lions possess in abundance, and backing down from a young buffalo, even one showing remarkable courage, would damage their reputation and confidence. They began to circle again, but this time with more caution, keeping a safer distance and looking for a way to separate mother from son without risking another painful encounter with those surprisingly effective horns. The young buffalo knew he had won a small victory, but he also understood that he couldn't maintain this level of intensity forever. His muscles were burning with fatigue, his shoulder throbbed where the lion's claws had torn through hide and flesh, and his throat was dry from bellowing warnings and breathing hard in the dusty air. Worse still, he could see that the lions weren't giving up, weren't walking away to find easier prey, but instead were settling in for a war of attrition, where time and numbers would eventually work in their favor. In the distance, the faint sound of hooves pounding earth began to grow louder as some members of the buffalo herd finally responded to the alarm calls that had been echoing across the plains. The young buffalo's desperate bellows had carried farther than he dared hope, reaching the ears of other bulls and protective females who understood that one of their own was in mortal danger. Help was coming, but the question was whether it would arrive in time, or if the lions would press their attack before reinforcements could turn the tide of this deadly confrontation. The lions heard the approaching hoofbeats too, and their body language shifted from patient predators to creatures facing a critical decision. They could press the attack now and try to bring down at least one of the buffaloes before the herd arrived, risking injury in a desperate rushed assault, or they could retreat and preserve their strength for another hunt on another day. The lead lion snarled in frustration, his scarred face twisting into an expression of pure predatory calculation as he weighed options that all seemed to lead to disappointment. The young buffalo sensed the shift in momentum, and he straightened up slightly, allowing himself a moment of hope that maybe, just maybe, he had done enough to keep his mother alive. His legs were shaking badly now, and blood continued to seep from the claw wounds on his shoulder, but he remained standing tall between his mother and the predators who had underestimated his resolve. His mother pressed close to him, and for the first time since the attack began, she allowed herself to believe they might both survive this nightmare. The thunder of approaching buffalo grew louder, and soon the first members of the herd came into view, charging across the plain, with their heads lowered and their eyes fixed on the lions who had dared to threaten their family. There were at least a dozen adults, including several large bulls whose massive horns and powerful builds made them formidable opponents that even hungry lions respected. The sight of so much reinforcement racing toward them made the final decision for the lion coalition. The lead lion let out one final roar that seemed to say this isn't over, before turning and trotting away from the young buffalo and his mother. The other two lions followed reluctantly, casting backward glances at the meal that had been so close, yet ultimately remained out of reach. They melted back into the tall grass, disappearing as silently as they had arrived, leaving only trampled earth and drops of blood, as evidence of the confrontation that had nearly ended in tragedy. The arriving buffalo herd surrounded the young male and his mother, forming a protective wall of bodies that no predator would dare challenge. The other bulls snorted and pawed at the ground, making threatening displays toward the distant lions, while the females moved close to inspect the wounds on both survivors. The young buffalo finally allowed his legs to buckle slightly as the adrenaline began to drain from his system, leaving him exhausted and trembling from the ordeal he had just survived. His mother nuzzled him gently, running her rough tongue over his wounded shoulder in a gesture that spoke of gratitude and love deeper than any words could express. The other herd members gathered around them, touching them with their muzzles and making low, rumbling sounds that seemed to communicate respect and admiration for what the young buffalo had done. He had stood against 3 adult male lions when every instinct should have told him to run. And his courage had saved not just his mother's life, but had also demonstrated something profound about the bonds that hold animal families together. The herd elder, a massive bull, with grey around his muzzle and countless scars from decades of surviving the savannah's dangers, approached the young buffalo and touched his forehead to the younger males in what seemed like a ceremonial gesture of recognition. In that moment, the young buffalo was no longer just a calf or an adolescent awkwardly growing into his adult body, but had earned his place as a true member of the herd, someone who understood what it meant to put others before yourself. As the herd began to move towards safer grazing areas, the young buffalo walked beside his mother, matching his pace to hers, so she wouldn't have to struggle to keep up. The other herd members seemed to naturally adjust their speed as well, creating a protective formation that kept the two survivors in the center, where they would be safest from any follow-up attacks. The lions were still out there somewhere, watching from the tall grass and analyzing what had gone wrong with their carefully planned hunt. The young buffalo's wounds would heal in time, leaving scars that would mark him for the rest of his life as a fighter who had faced death and refused to yield. Other animals in the herd would see those scars and remember the day he stood alone against 3 lions, defending his mother with nothing but courage and love to sustain him. Young calves would hear the story passed down through the herd's collective memory, learning that sometimes survival isn't about being the biggest or the strongest, but about having the heart to stand firm when everything inside you screams to run. His mother knew that her time was growing shorter with each passing season, and that eventually age would claim her as it claims all living things. But she also knew now that when that day came, she would face it without fear or regret, because she had raised a son who understood the meaning of loyalty and sacrifice. He had given her the most precious gift any child can give a parent, by showing her that the values she had taught him through example and patience had taken root and grown into something beautiful and strong. The herd reached a watering hole by midday, and the young buffalo drank deeply, feeling the cool water soothe his parched throat and wash away some of the dust and dried blood that covered his body. His mother drank beside him, and for a moment everything was peaceful, as if the morning's terror had been nothing more than a bad dream. But the reality of what had happened lingered in the watchful eyes of every herd member who now understood that danger could strike at any moment. News of the young buffalo's courageous stand spread beyond just his immediate herd, as animals across the savannah seemed to take notice of what had happened that morning. Other buffalo herds that crossed paths with them in the following days would pause, and observers noticed how the elders would approach the young male and touch him with what seemed like recognition and respect. Even animals from different species appeared to sense that something extraordinary had occurred, creating ripples through the invisible network of communication that connects all living things in the wild. Wildlife photographers and researchers who had been documenting the area for years happened to capture some of the confrontation on camera, and when the images and footage reached the outside world, they sparked an incredible response. People from every corner of the globe watched in amazement as this young buffalo refused to abandon his aging mother, standing firm against overwhelming odds with a bravery that transcended species and touched something universal in the human heart. The story went viral, spreading across social media platforms and news outlets faster than anyone could have predicted. Comments poured in from millions of people who saw in this young buffalo's actions a reflection of values that seem increasingly rare in modern human society. Devotion, loyalty, sacrifice, and the willingness to face danger to protect those we love resonated deeply with viewers who recognize these qualities as fundamental to what makes life meaningful. Scientists and animal behaviorists were equally fascinated because while protective behavior is common in the animal kingdom, the level of calculated courage displayed by this young male was extraordinary even by nature's impressive standards. The footage showed clearly how he had assessed the threat, positioned himself strategically, and even counterattacked when necessary, demonstrating a level of tactical thinking that challenged assumptions about animal intelligence and emotional capacity. Researchers began citing this case in papers and presentations about animal cognition, family bonds, and the evolution of altruistic behavior. The young buffalo became an unexpected ambassador for his species, helping people see these often overlooked animals as complex, intelligent beings capable of profound emotional connections. Back in the savannah, far from the cameras and the global attention, the young buffalo continued his life, much as before, grazing alongside his mother and watching over her with the same devotion he had always shown. The wounds on his shoulder healed into raised scars that caught the light differently than the surrounding hide, serving as permanent reminders of the day he chose love over survival instinct. His mother grew stronger in the weeks following the attack, as if his sacrifice had given her renewed purpose and determination to make the most of whatever time remained to her. The lions that had attacked them were occasionally spotted in the distance, but they never approached that particular herd again, perhaps having learned that some meals carry too high a price, or perhaps recognizing that this group had something special, a willingness to fight for each other that made them more dangerous than their individual strengths would suggest. The young buffalo continued to mature, growing larger and more powerful with each passing season, until he eventually became one of the herd's dominant bulls, protecting not just his mother, but all the vulnerable members who needed his strength. His mother lived for 3 more years after that fateful morning, enjoying a peaceful old age, surrounded by family and protected by the son who had refused to let her face death alone. When she finally passed away from natural causes, the entire herd gathered around her, and the young buffalo, who was now a full-grown bull, stood vigil over her body for an entire day and night in a display of mourning that moved even the hardened researchers who witnessed it. He had kept his unspoken promise to protect her, and she had died knowing she was loved. The story of the young buffalo who fought 3 lions to defend his mother became more than just a viral sensation or a scientific curiosity, but evolved into a powerful reminder of what truly matters in life, regardless of species. In a world that often celebrates individual achievement and self-preservation above all else, this young animal had demonstrated that the greatest strength comes from our connections to others and our willingness to sacrifice for those we love. His courage inspired countless people to examine their own relationships and commitments, asking themselves if they would have the same strength to stand firm when tested. And somewhere in the golden grasslands of Africa, the herd continues to pass down his story to each new generation, teaching young calves that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to leave someone you love, to face the darkness alone.